Hello, it's Brad Laurie or BlockchainBrad, and today we're speaking about all things DxDAO. And with me, we have two key members of what is essentially a decentralized team right around the globe. We have John Kelleher and Ingemar Ramirez. To both of you, thank you sincerely for being here to explain more about DxDAO.
Thanks a lot for having us on, Brad. It's an honor. Been watching your channel since a couple of years now. So it's great that we get to, cross paths this way.
Likewise, mate. And also to you, John, thank you so much for being here. Do you want to just make a quick comment?
Oh yeah, I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having us, Brad, and looking forward to the discussion.
No worries. And for all of all the listeners as well, it's important this is entirely free. This is about education, information, and allowing these awesome guys who've come on the channel to be able to explicate, explain, and just inform us about what fundamentally dxDAO stands for. We all need to know more. So let's get into this, guys. Let's roll up the sleeves and unpack what is DxDAO. Let's start with some of those key terms that you guys would know, and we certainly don't know that much. Or let's assume we don't. The first part is a sovereign collective. Another statement is that you guys decentralize DeFi. So do you want to just both of you touch on either of those terms to help us better understand what is DxDAO?
Sure. John, you want to go first?
Sure. In terms of sovereign collective, I think what that is talking about is that the group is the DAO, which is made of its constituents who have what's called reputation associated with an Ethereum address representing their voting power, make decisions collectively. And I guess like the sovereign nature of that is that, it governs itself. And then in terms of decentralizing DeFi, I think that's a very important piece of the narrative for DxDAO. DeFi, I think we've all seen, has become quite a hot topic and a big movement in crypto. But when you look closely at a lot of the projects, you realize that there are many centralized elements from centralized teams that are perhaps backed by venture capital, or they may have admin control of the contracts, to even projects that portend to have token governance. Perhaps that token distribution is not particularly decentralized. And so one of the main kind of thrusts of the DxDAO is to kind of push decentralization in the DeFi space, really push open finance to be truly decentralized finance, by setting an example and by having and perhaps even forking and making specific projects even more decentralized themselves.
Well, Ingemar, I wanted to ask you about that in the context of the continuum that we see emerging and has been in discussion for some time with regard to CeFi across to DeFi. Now, as John's alluding to, there is certainly that diversity, and you want to be more at perhaps that DeFi end. So do you want to just touch on that with respect to the evolution of DxDAO since you started more than a year ago, especially given that DeFi, as John said, is really hot right now. But again, we need to unpack what is real, what's verified, and what's veritable.
Yeah, sure. So the DxDAO, it originated about a year ago, and it was sort of like a pet project between DAOStack and Gnosis. I came along a little more than a month ago, so I wasn't around during the vote staking period, and it was this period where people they participated in certain activities in order to acquire reputation and voting power on the genesis of that DAO. Since then, in order to acquire reputation now is to have a proposal passed. So what I like about this DAO is that it is very open. You can just come in, join the discussion. There's no application. There's no forms or anything like that. Anybody can just join the discussion, find a way to participate, and get recognized for it.
Yeah,
So if that answers your questions.
I noticed it looks a bit like a GitHub as well. I had a look today and it's quite open. Now, if we look back at a bit of the evolution, I wanted to just discuss a little bit more about Gnosis with both of you, because obviously that was quite integral to the architecture design. So do either of you want to comment on helping us understand two things? One is, what is a DAO for those who actually don't know? And also, what is the relationship with Gnosis here?
So the first question is what is a DAO? Like, were we to define DAO?
Well, sure. I mean, if you could just give us a brief overview, like a high-level assessment.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's something that there isn't a clear kind of consensus on in crypto. I see, a lot of different types of groups and organizations referring to themselves as DAOs, and I mean, I think that's great. There's a lot of experimenting going on. In my mind, if we break it down, decentralized autonomous organization, like of course an organization is like a group of people. So to me, I think a key piece in that, which I think dxDAO kind of defines itself as is like the decisions have to be made through consensus, and even all the capital that dxDAO has in its treasury can only be spent through consensus. Like, so contrasting that with, say, the rage quit function in Moloch, where people can kind of individually pull out their capital. dxDAO, like all the capital is fully committed and it will only be spent if, there's consensus amongst its constituents. And I think the decentralized aspect of a DAO, like dxDAO, I think is really trying to push that to kind of like its maximum, right? Like, so it's open to anybody to come in and request reputation. It's, I think a goal of the existing community to continue to grow it and become bigger and more distributed. And I think really eventually, like, the dream of DAOs is to become unstoppable in that sense, right? Like censorship resistant themselves to the level of the underlying blockchains themselves, or like approaching that. And then of course, like, there's the autonomous piece, and that's really like the smart contracts and like the code and the automation. And so, using DAOStack, dxDAO leverages these, voting machines that they've built and these consensus mechanisms, which really like help coordinate and like scale coordination. So those are things that, that aspect is something that dxDAO is experimenting with, and I think is super important to the DAO space in general. Is like, how do we provide these incentives and then automation pieces leveraging the blockchain?
And Ingemar, I wanted to ask you, in that context with cypherpunk in the movement, we saw the likes of Bitcoin really kickstart this. Obviously, the whole narrative of censorship resistance, making sure decentralization is possible and enabled through the DAOs, that's certainly an exciting thing. Gnosis has been around for a while. I remember watching them and learning about them years ago, actually, through their presentations in Berlin. So clearly they have a key role here. They're important technology. They're important as a platform, as a service as well, through their DEX as just one product. So what's the connection with Gnosis? Do you want to just comment on that?
Yeah. So at this moment, we are governing one of their products. We have basically custody of their Mesa-DEX. It's the front end of the Gnosis protocol. So we can totally govern like which tokens get listed on there. We can make updates such as, the UI, which should be happening soon. So we work pretty closely with Gnosis's team, and it's a collaborative process, and it's also a learning process, as we learn what it means to govern as a collective with no hierarchy. There are no C-level roles. And I think that lends to the autonomy factor, because since we're vast and, remotely spread around the world, it gives us the opportunity to be like self-starters and just doers. There's no one really giving orders. And so it's really up to us to just like see what needs to be done and go out and do it.
Right. And obviously, for those who want to look into this more, what is exciting is there's already empirical evidence of the building. That's something I think is quite important right now as well, when we've seen the likes of white papers be, the key method, I suppose, in 2017 of really making that blockchain bet. Now we see a lot more since then. So in that context, let's talk a little bit more about the DAO, dxDAO, in comparison to, let's say, a suite of DAOs. So for example, if you go to DAOStack, you see a whole lot of optionalities there, a lot of choices for different DAOs. So what sets you apart, guys, in terms of being, perhaps a better DAO?
I think one of the key things is the size of the membership, and it's also a mix of pseudonymous members and kind of public members, like you can see Ingemar and myself here, but other addresses that hold reputation. There's no clear identity associated with them, and there's over 400 member addresses, and that is growing. And I also believe that it's pretty well distributed, at least from the public members that I've seen. People are located geographically all over the globe.
Yeah, I know. I did a comparison to others, and the numbers really did stand out, actually, when we look at the DAOStack, literally, in terms of just how popular you've become. Now, DAOStack itself, gentlemen, do you want to just touch on that as well? Because obviously they are important for, once again, the overall picture for dxDAO. So what's the relationship there? Do you speak with them regularly?
Yeah, we do have a couple of DAOStack members in our chats that we talk to and give feedback to as we use their Alchemy interface.
Yep.
So the cool thing about Alchemy is that it's very, very user friendly, in my opinion. It's very easily navigable, and the way DAOStack's spin on the DAO framework is it's holographic consensus, which kind of gamifies voting through allowing you to stake gen tokens to boost proposals and I guess make them happen a little more quickly for more urgent proposals. And it's it's a very transparent interface, and it allows us to sort of encourage participation within the DAO, and also communication with these proposals.
Right, and if people want to look more into consensus, they can go into the white paper, and that's available also through the links provided by the dxDAO team on their website. And we will touch on that a little bit more in the interview. But I wanted to talk to you about a statement actually by you, Ingemar, in the discussions as we prepped for this interview. There was a statement made where there's the potential of a governance as a service to other companies. So what does that actually mean for the potential of dxDAO?
Yeah, it's an idea that I put forth. I kind of just sat down one day and thought about the dxDAO and their revenue streams, and considered Mesa is one of the products that we govern, that was pretty much built from the ground up by Gnosis, and one of the value adds that we give is that we have the custody of it, and it is no longer, belonging, to Gnosis. And there could be arguments made of the legal implications of that. Mm-hmm. So we're taking on that custody, and I think that that could be a service in itself. And we're seeing other companies and DAOs trying to decentralize their products a little more and leave it up to communities to govern them well. And I think that incentivizing the communities, with stakeholdership in these products, that turns it into a service in itself. So I think that we have more possible revenue streams than simply, fees from products.
Right, and we're going to get into that as well, because obviously right now, I guess what separates really effective, really well discussed and well explored teams and those that are just regarded as Bitcoins is proof of that revenue, proof of development, and certainly there's a lot of literature on that focus of revenue. And as you're saying, there's a lot more to be said than those fees themselves. Now, if we talk a little bit more, John, about the DApps or the DApps related to dxDAO, we've already talked a little bit about Mesa, but there's the, correct me if I mispronounce these, but then there's the Omen, is that how you pronounce it?
Omen, yes.
The Mix, and also the Mesa. So do you want to just touch on each of those in the product suite, if that's what we want to call them, or the DApps, with regard to the products on offer?
Sure, and each of those is at a different stage of development. So Mesa, which Ingemar alluded to earlier is live now. It is a DEX, and it's a front end to the Gnosis protocol. Omen is almost complete on the development side, so we can expect it to be launching pretty soon. There was actually a proposal that got voted down because a bug was found, kind of like, but it's very close to being launched.
You stole my question. I found
it. Omen is a prediction market platform. Again, leveraging Gnosis technology, so it's built on the conditional token framework. And then thirdly is Mix, which has been designed, but has not entered development yet. There are some DAOTalk posts, and it looks like there'll probably be a proposal soon on DAOStack to fund that effort. But the goal there is a privacy-centric DeFi dashboard.
Sure. And it does look like you said, there's different stages of development in each of them, but it's so transparent. When I had a look at the DAOTalk, the conversations, the discussions, and you can certainly click into them, it's clear that there's a lot of developers engaged in each of these at different levels. So how many developers, globally are involved in the DAO process, in the dxDAO, and particularly with regard to the building side?
Sure. Yeah, I think directly being active within the DXDAO community, I'd say there's about a dozen developers. But in effect, the products are actually leveraging the effort of many more. I would say maybe even more than 100 when you look at kind of the work that it's building on top of, leveraging the DAOStack framework, Gnosis's conditional token platform, Gnosis protocol. Tornado Cash is key to the Mix effort. So, I mean, we're really building on top of people and standing on other shoulders here. And it's really a lot of dev work kind of coming together to create some pretty awesome products, I would say.
Right. And Ingemar, you must be loving all the support from those other established teams in the DeFi space, especially given, as we've discussed, in 2020, it is a hot topic, it is a popular topic, but beyond that, there's been a lot of research and now we see a lot of pragmatic work being done in the space to better finance, potentially for the globe. So, you stand on the shoulders of giants, perhaps with Ethereum, but beyond that, you also have the support of a lot of other startups that are really showcasing and, supporting you publicly.
Yeah, really grateful for that. Because a lot of our developments wouldn't happen without these other companies. So we want to maintain our strong relationship with Gnosis and DAOStack because we use their products, and we're trying to make a case for the first self-sovereign organization who actually can build products and function and scale.
Yes, and that's a great point, because one of the references for your slogans is being super scalable. So do you want to touch on that, given that you're talking about that now? How do you achieve super scalability?
Yeah, I wonder that too, because we communicate across maybe a half dozen chat platforms. We have a lot of conversations every week. Every couple of weeks, it feels like a couple months with this DAO, and we've managed to raise quite a lot of ETH, and it's still there, it's still safe. We are very conservative about the use of funds. We've been really, really good about it, and we're making it work. It's hard to explain.
Yeah,
how.
and I think in terms of the scalability, I think DAOStack has set us up fairly well. It was one of the key ideas with Holographic Consensus, is to allow large DAOs to be able to make decisions quickly without having everybody's attention always focused on every proposal. And they do that through this staking process, so that basically if somebody, it's sort of like prediction markets light, actually, where if somebody thinks this is going to be an unpopular decision, they'll stake against it, and it may not even make it really into it may just kind of die out because of that. Or if people think it's important, they'll raise the stake and bring it to everybody's attention and allow it to pass with a lower threshold, essentially. So, right. I mean, DAOStack is kind of a great step in that direction, but there's many problems, I think, and a lot of innovation that I hope will happen to kind of support this idea of scalable DAOs. In fact, today and later, I'm actually talking with these guys as a team called Abridged, and they work on basically signal voting within Telegram groups. And so this is an area that we're exploring in dxDAO, is like how to better kind of facilitate off-chain consensus leading up into these like Alchemy DAOStack votes.
Right, and as you gentlemen would know, nothing's set in stone as well. I mean, you're constantly iterating, you're constantly innovating with regard to the technology, and you're proving that with that mention, with Abridged and any other team you're engaged with in the future. It's all about improving the scalability and other aspects of the architecture. Now, to do that, you need a strong team. So I was wondering, despite being decentralized and having various parties that, and many are anonymous, I would imagine, can you just give us some sort of confidence from your response that you do have people who know their shit, that know what they're doing, have tech skills that can really lead this out? And I ask you this in the context of a lot of the hype we see in the space. Trying to differentiate between what is real, what isn't, is a tough thing, and it's a tough ask in crypto.
Yeah. I mean, I think Omen, if you look at the Omen product, it's a great example of this like collaborative integration of many teams and products. So like Gnosis, Claros, Reality.io, all kind of coming together with dxDAO to like, build this product and allow this to happen. So yeah, I mean, if you're not familiar with the space, like the Gnosis has been around for a few years now. They're one of the largest, best funded blockchain companies. And, I think, most people would attest to their technical abilities. And there are several other teams. And then also just, amongst the kind of dxDAO folks who are completely focused, I think people are coming from backgrounds such as like MakerDAO. And, I work at Level K. We've been around for a few years and have worked with some of the best teams in the space. So I think there's a deep bench of technical and just, crypto talent and expertise like at work with the dxDAO.
Got it. Okay. So here's a tough question. Now, obviously, you're very connected with the Ethereum team, certainly proponents of DeFi in that sense. But even today, I was having a discussion with a very strong sort of proponent and media sort of front man for Ethereum. And I was making the point that perhaps Ethereum is not, or DeFi rather, is not a trademark connected directly to Ethereum, but more just a general sort of ethos for all of us to sort of support. What are your thoughts on that? Are you open to all platforms, or are you really focused on Ethereum?
I guess we love Ethereum because of its network effect, and there's so many people involved in it, and it's just I think it's a lot of what the developers are most experienced with and comfortable with. I don't think that like we're completely closed off to like working with other chains.
Got it. Well, I'll make sure to call Gavin Wood then and let him know.
I think in essence, DeFi is largely exists on Ethereum, right? So as a DAO focused on decentralizing, DeFi, then it's really the only place to be at the moment. But yeah, the idea is clearly bigger than just the blockchain itself, right?
Yeah, and it's a nice save, John, because obviously all of the different startups related to supporting you all seem to come from Ethereum as well. And obviously we're all really impressed, I think, with just how far Ethereum has come. That's the reality. Now, in your white paper, as we mentioned, you discussed the super scalability aspect, but also with regard to that, there was a statement saying that it's not a Gnosis DAO. But rather your own. So, what does it actually mean to state that in the white paper so that people understand the differentiation?
Yeah, so we should clarify first here that this white paper was written, I think, with a lot of effort from Gnosis and that initial launching group about a year ago. And it's actually quite a bit out of date, doesn't include some of the things that have happened more recently. There's, in fact, some community members working on updating it. But I think to answer your question, Gnosis, along with DAOStack, launched dxDAO about a year ago and stepped back. Like they don't want to, it would be kind of antithetical to the whole idea of the DAO for them to kind of like continue to be involved and like run it with using their initial influence. Right? So they did a very good job just kind of stepping back. And I think that's actually a big reason why, some people ask like, oh, how long has dxDAO been around? Like, why is it just getting, it kind of laid almost dormant for almost a year as, that kind of maybe chaos from that initial staking period kind of just kind of resulted in like this kind of like loss of momentum, but there were, enough interested people that it kind of like slowly catalyzed into its own force. And that's kind of where we are now. Sorry, I'm probably kind of rambling a bit, but
not at all. And it's great to hear that people are starting to now look into this further. We've also seen the hype of a connected coin. We are going to touch on that, but all things aside, attention is value. Network effects are valuable as well. And we're starting to see the value of DAOs more so with regard to censorship resistance, and that's attracting a lot of people into the space. So let's discuss some of your features as well, Ingemar. You mentioned one of them before, no hierarchies. Awesome, because we know now that it's about that autonomy and it's about decentralization. But what about the others? There's references to symmetry of info, swarm knowledge, and open for everyone. What do they mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what they mean is that anyone can just come in, join the discussion, participate. Also, anyone can create a proposal for something. Like, you don't need permission to do that. It takes reputation to vote on them, but anyone can just suggest something, and debate about it and offer as much proof and evidence as possible that, funded is needed for such and such, or reputation is necessary for such and such because I contributed this. But it is very open. Anyone can just come in, join the discussion. We have weekly calls that are open to anyone who wants to join. So, we try to be as transparent as possible.
And I suppose that's also where the democracy comes in as well to the design, because it does allow, everyday people to be involved and have a voice literally through the voting. Now, in terms of the tech stack, or in terms of the design rather, you have several schemes, as I understand. So do either of you want to touch on those? Firstly, perhaps start with what is this scheme more generally, and then we'll break it down into the different schemes.
Sure, yeah. A scheme, or a plugin as it's kind of denoted in the Alchemy UI, Alchemy being the DAOStack interface to their DAOs, which dxDAO uses. So there's 8 schemes or plugins for dxDAO, and essentially with DAOStack DAOs, you can do almost anything you want on Ethereum, but you have to build a scheme to support that particular action or thing, right? So, so the main one is probably the one that gets used the most on dxDAO is called like contribution, reputation, and like funding. I'm actually messing up the name, but what it does, it allows like spending from the Treasury and the allocation of new reputation to addresses. And then there's other ones such as ENS related ones that allow dxDAO to set content hashes on its ENS domains. So that's how it updates its sites. Like, so these front ends that we're talking about, Mesa, Omen, how they effectively get launched through these proposals. So you actually get this interesting effect of like the site will effectively be live when the proposal is made, because somebody will have had to have deployed it to IPFS, but it won't resolve to the official dxDAO domain until that proposal passes. There's also a registry scheme. So this gets used to maintain lists that get used with dxDAO products.
I see. So essentially, they're really part of the suite of tooling, that's available, that are built into the whole system of dxDAO.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, in that, I really wanted to better understand the holographic consensus, because as you mentioned before, that's the whole reason why you can, make claims like being super scalable in the future. Sets you apart very specifically with everybody else. So 3 words that came up when I was reading through them were decision making, high volume, and the efficiency, resilience sort of aspects. So do either of you want to touch on anything at all to just strengthen the value of the holographic consensus?
Yeah, I like to think of it as scalable consensus, right? And another way to think of it is maybe like proposal filtering, kind of on a more practical level. And yeah, what it basically is an attempt to solve the problem of, if you have a large group and a lot of decisions, attention bandwidth is limited, and everybody can't pay attention to everything all the time. So how do you align decision making in a group without using up everybody's attention all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to add also that in order to pass a vote through Alchemy, you have to have 51% voting power, voting for the proposal. So if you have 1,000 people, you'd have to like always have 500 people available. So what the holographic consensus does is it allows it turns the majority vote into a relative vote. Whereas, like, let's say if only 10 people voted, the majority of those votes, wherever they go, determines the outcome.
I see. So how do you ensure that there's low risk with regard to attacks? Those mal attacks, those attack vectors that can happen.
Yeah, I mean,
either of you.
Go ahead, Ingmar.
Sure.
But
we had we had initial buzz from the raise, and like we did see like maybe half a dozen like proposals that were kind of, they range from just like jokes, to attempts to get like free funding, and I guess fortunately for us, like it does cost gas to make proposals, and they are visible, and like it does demand consensus in order to pass them. So I thought we would be flooded, but it was only like a handful, and that was about as bad as it got. So in terms of attacks, I thought it would get much worse, but
so let's say in the future, because of that, you were preempting that and it didn't happen. What about the future? Like what are you putting in place because you have observed that and you were fortunate in that sense?
Yeah, so I mean, by design, the dxDAO moves rather slowly, right? So even with the boosting and the holographic consensus, I think like the fastest action that it can take is still on the order of 4 days or something without absolute majority. If something gets absolute majority, it passes right away, but that requires 50%. So I mean that's one aspect of the security, is that it's slow. And now things that some of the developers along with DAOStack have been working on, since the fundraise kind of like increased the attention and kind of like the honeypot, if you will. There's been efforts to basically add additional monitoring tools beyond the UI itself to basically make sure that members are aware of the proposals that are coming across, and to make sure that no malicious proposal were to be able to get through.
Okay. Well, it's good to know that those are all built in. Now, I wanted to touch a little bit more on understanding the vote staking, as one of the schemes. And also in the context of perhaps you can educate us about MGN and also Gen as well, so that people understand exactly what the role they play in the design.
So MGN is also a bit of an outdated token. It was a token that you could earn on the Dutch exchange, which was the initial product that dxDAO had. Unfortunately, it really hasn't seen any use since the initial launch, and it doesn't really get talked about too much more. But yeah, I can let Ingmar take the Gen token.
Yeah. So the way it works now, like Gen is the only token you can use to stake on votes in order to boost them, shortening their time span, as well as ruling in the relative majority as opposed to the 51% majority. So right now the way it works, you can only do that with one token.
Got it. So now let's talk about the context of regulation, compliance, and also obviously your own dxDAO token. Where does all of this fit in? We're talking right now about clear utility in that sense with Gen. But what about dxDAO?
So dxDAO, the token DXD is what you're asking about,
yes,
right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so the DXD token uses the fair mint continuous token model, and the essential idea there is that revenues go into this bonding curve and support the sell price for the token. So as it stands today, it's basically a revenue share or dividend token. And kind of legal questions. I think there's a lot of legal questions around this. And I think dxDAO is kind of blazing this trail forward and being the first like decentralized organization to launch this type of a fundraiser. And yeah, it doesn't exist in any jurisdiction. It's not a legal entity registered in any government. So, how does an entity like this interact with the traditional legal system? I think is largely a question that kind of remains, we're really just beginning to ask, let alone answer. So, yeah.
And John, thank you so much, for this open and transparent conversation, because to be honest with you, it was one of the most exciting parts, I think, of the interview I wanted to touch on, because you literally are the trailblazers when it comes to challenging the status quo, because we don't see the likes of this globally anywhere in the world, really. And now we're starting to see perhaps jurisdictions having to rewrite the textbooks, rewrite the legal frameworks to cater for the innovation. We tend to see that tech leads this out. So are you confident that, there's a future for DAOs in this context? If we're being real, obviously there's probably concerns right around the world right now with regard to everything from Bitcoin all the way across to DAOs in market share. Also when we see the likes of Wall Street really struggling at the moment in that context. So what are your thoughts on this, because it is so cutting edge?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a big promise here. And go ahead, Ingmar. I'll chime in after you.
I think there are multiple DAOs going. They're doing their own interpretations of how DAOs should comply. Like the Lao, for example, they're legally incorporated. Like Staker DAO is another one that legally incorporated. So we're trying to go as full decentralization as we can, and I guess take that to the end of that spectrum.
Yeah, and I think DAOs hold a really big promise in my mind, at least. I think it's this idea that we can innovate on the way people organize and do it at a more scalable and more efficient level or way than has ever been done before. Basically, innovate on the idea of the firm. And this is something that DAOStack pushes, and Gnosis was really keen on it, and when they were trying to launch this. And I think we've been doing a good job of dxDAO has been doing a good job of advancing that. And but yeah, I mean, there's a lot. It's a big experiment, but yeah, I have a lot of hope that this technology really will push people forward in how we organize and how we do things, and it will play in with the other efforts in blockchain to kind of open up financial systems, etc.
I totally agree. And it's interesting because having spoken to DAOStack some years ago, back then, I think a lot of people thought we were crazy, or they were, perhaps very idealistic. But now we fast forward the clock to today and we see that there's a lot of legitimacy in the space, and perhaps even in the mainstream. They're really discussing this with a very serious tone. So in that sense, I wanted to ask you with regard to liaising perhaps with some of those jurisdictions, some of those decision makers actually in, from the top down in government sectors. Is there any of that? Because I know it seems odd to ask that given you're a DAO, but perhaps there needs to be some liaising as well.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think we're very early on for dxDAO, but it's still a rather small experiment. So I haven't seen, not aware of any kind of liaising or relationships with existing governments. But yeah, I mean, if the hopes that I have for DAOs are realized, I think ultimately, the things need to be kind of figured out, and legal frameworks need to be kind of figured out in this new context.
Got it. So what are some of the challenges, Ingmar, with regard to the revenue itself? I wanted to touch on that because reputation is so integral to this. And I wanted to better understand the future of dxDAO in terms of being viable and having some sort of sustainability because of the revenue. So beyond the fees, what's possible? What do you envision?
Yeah. It's a really good question. We're moving at our own pace when it comes to creating revenue with our products. I think the current version of Omen won't have revenue going directly to our bonding curve from the start. Luckily the way we're spending our budget is very cognizant of our runway, and we have an open discussion of like properly budgeting every month so that we do have a decent runway so that we can figure out how to entirely sustain ourselves without relying on our capital raise.
Yeah, and that's really important for the confidence of, and I'll use your term in the literature as investor, and that's a risky term, but it was there because quite simply we want to see that transparency. And I did notice in the DAOTalk there is that budgeting inserted in there. So I liked that you could go in as someone who's participating and learn a lot of this stuff. But clearly there's also risks for bad proposals, as we've talked about before, built in. So what are you doing to cater perhaps, for those risks of bad proposals as well?
But can you just elaborate on what do you mean by bad proposals?
Well, when I was doing some of the reading, there was references to just proposals more generally. And then there was a reference point to a bad proposal that can actually be had. So, with regard to submissions, regard to working through the system, sometimes you get a scenario where there can be a bad proposal put forward. So, in that sense, what's done? What sort of mechanisms are being put in place to monitor, to make sure the proposals are all clean?
One of the ways we sort of draft our proposals to the community, we use DAOTalk, which is a forum, and if I have an idea that I might want some opinions on, I make a DAOTalk thread, so it's it's not on chain, and it allows me to collect feedback from other people. If this proposal gets a few likes and some adjustments, people have seen it already, which means that if they like it, they'll likely vote for it. Those are kind of one of the ways that we can sort of clean up our proposals and just optimize them.
Yeah, it's more just the illusion of not ending up this crazy Reddit scenario where sometimes you just see just an excess of sort of time wasting proposals. And I've noticed that there is that very clean submission. So it's just interesting how you did that. Now, John, I wanted to ask you, you're going to have to roll your sleeves up for this one, and that's all about the token. We're going to dig deep on this. Now, what essentially is the purpose of this? We really need to understand this, and you're not going to be comfortable because no group, no CEO, and no members like talking about tokens, but too bad. You have a DXD native token. Some of the reference points here are from the literature, once again, is that it's an economic claim to revenue. It also enables grant access, blah, blah, blah. But from you guys, I wanted to hear more so, what fundamentally is the purpose of the token? And are you confident that it's not just, that quasi-security that, people could just brand you as, when we know it just simply has to be more?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simply tied to revenue from the DXDAO, and that's the promise of the DXDAO. And so funding comes in to the curve, and that can be used by DXDAO to develop products, and revenue goes through the curve, some of which supports the sell price. So it doesn't directly distribute dividends to the token holders. It goes into this buyback reserve, which supports the sell price. So it's more of a mint and burn continuous token model. And I know there's been, I think, some confusion in the community about that. There's actually been some iteration on the wording in the community on how to clearly kind of convey how this works. And because the Ferment system is actually has some complexities and is pretty powerful when you look at it. But yeah, essentially it's a mint and burn continuous token model. You can buy on the curve. That funding goes to DAO. DAO uses it to build stuff, sends revenue through the curve. A portion of that revenue, which is configurable, goes into the buyback reserve. And that's what DXD is today. I mean, there has been a lot of talk in the DXDAO community about other things that DXD could be used for. This could range from being used in the governance itself to providing some kind of membership, so to speak, rights to the product suite, to who knows, other aspects of usage and, I guess, utility, if that's the term, in the products. But yeah.
And John, I'm so glad we're talking about this, because that's exactly where I wanted to go with this with both of you. In that, when I was reading through, I immediately thought, perhaps there needs to be a lot more robustness with regard to this token, because obviously the key conversation still to this day is dividend. It's, there's revenue. So moving away just from, the Wall Street element of this and building this out. So, is there a plan in any way to start to explore this more than just the conversation?
Good. Do you have that? Do you mean explore revenue?
Explore the different possibilities of this token, as opposed to just the current, evidence that we know what it does, fundamentally, as you've explained.
I'm just based on ideas I've seen kind of pop up in the forums, in the chat. I do think there's a lot of potential there. Yeah. That's my take on it. It's hard to say where it will go. Kind of go anywhere.
Right. Well, it's exciting. It's going to be, sorry, go ahead, Ingemar. Obviously, this is a big question. So.
Oh yeah. Like that, like many other things is an open discussion. And, we are playing with the idea of like allowing membership rights in some of our products and incorporating them, in the future.
Right. Another idea being discussed with DXD is, somehow tying DXD and the reputation, which is the voting power of the DAO, together in some way, or giving people who hold DXD some kind of voting power themselves, or right to earn reputation. This is something that's come up a few times, and I could see, potentially evolving into something that gets implemented.
And it's interesting that you're so open about the experimentation, but the reality is this is the way with almost all startups. And you don't simply just have everything planned, from the beginning. You may get some criticism, and that's fair for, the evolution of the development, but that's just the nature of these startups. Now, with regard to unlocks and Treasury, I did want to touch on that as well, because it did seem like it's a very open approach in that you don't have very specific time slots, or you don't have a roadmap that's finite with regard to how you approach this.
Yeah, I think the key thing here is it's a DAO, right? And it's got 400 plus members, and things have to be done by consensus. So it's, it's impossible for me and Ingemar to come here and say, oh, this is the plan, or this is what's going to happen. And then it inherently is kind of a slow and, at times maybe even seemingly chaotic process for that group to achieve consensus. And I think you see these efforts to, kind of come up with some consensus around the plan and the products. I think there's clearly a lot of interest and attention around the existing products and product efforts. So those kind of carry their own momentum. But in terms of, what does the budget get spent on? At what rate is it getting spent on? These are all kind of like emerging consensus topics, essentially, right? That we're kind of participating in as members and kind of watch unfold kind of before us.
Right. Well, Ingemar, one of the things I did want to ask you, because this is the kind of question you no doubt get repeatedly through Telegram scenarios, is with regard to the token itself. People want to see price go up. That's the reality. And you can't comment on price. I'm not going to ask you to do that. But I do want to understand more about the relationship between the bonding curve with regard to the value of this token, because that really is important for the future growth of this token. And I want to better understand also how that reflects the growth of dxDAO more generally as a group of decentralized parties. We want to see this dxDAO be a real proven point of value.
Right. Yeah. So, we've got a handful of products in the pipeline. We're moving at our own pace, and we've got a great community that that is very curious, and they offer great feedback, and we try to listen to all of it. So we've got a lot of priorities right now, Omen being one of them, and just having a functioning product out the door is it's kind of number one for us.
Yeah, and it's actually rare sometimes, to have this the degree of development and be able to say you have products already. That's a boon, I think, for you. And I did notice that you have quite an academic community as well, which is also quite refreshing, because you do have the moon boys in many communities. Now, one of the things that I did also want to touch on very briefly, and I did tell you this, I would only do this in this way, was that right now we also see the likes of DMM or the decentralized money market emerging now, and with their governance token also just, you know, spreading its fire across crypto Twitter and everywhere else. But I just wanted to better understand just one thing, and that was a relationship between dxDAO and DMM.
Yeah, no, so Ingemar, I think, you know, you guys talked about earlier as a governance as a service, which is a term that like Ingemar used and wrote an article about, and I think it really captured some of these ideas that are percolating in the dxDAO community about what like dxDAO's core competency is, and that maybe being governance. And so I think DMM is a great example of this another project that is trying to operate in the DeFi space, like recognizing this power of the dxDAO, and so they granted dxDAO 1% of their tokens.
Is it 2%?
Yeah, well, so it starts at 1% and then goes up to 2% based on like how successful the sale went, and it seems to have gone, I think, largely successful. So I think dxDAO will get close to the 2% that was stipulated, and like the idea is that dxDAO will basically help govern DMM.
I see. So essentially, right. So essentially you provided a service, really. Do you anticipate this could be one of many in the future? If it did well and it was successful with DMM, obviously not only is it fortuitous for you, or is it financially valuable for you, but could this be just the beginning of many to come?
I would hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree too. I think this is a great experiment, and you know, if you're a company hoping to decentralize your product, you would at least want you know, some of the ownership to be with, you know, experienced groups of people, so it's not like there are hundreds of token holders around the world who have never met each other and don't, you know, necessarily like understand like on-chain governance, like running your product. You would want some of it, you know, to some of the power to belong to you know, I guess people with some experience. Right. And I guess that's what we're trying to help.
And don't quote me on this, but I believe DMM has forked their governance system from Compounds. So essentially the task like ahead for dxDAO is to integrate with this DMM governance system. But if I understand this correctly, that, you know, that integration would essentially be the same as one with Compound, right? So like, you know, it's just interesting to see all these discussions and, you know, things happening around Compound and its governance, and kind of thinking that like dxDAO is doing is actively like kind of setting itself up to participate in a similar system. So it'd be interesting to see if like maybe dxDAO itself becomes a, you know, a Compound politician, like a DAO as like one of these kind of voting members that can have others delegate their votes to it. Yeah,
exactly. Especially now, John, given the hype that Compound sort of let out, and then we saw the emergence, obviously, of DMG and DMM. Now, one of the things I did want to touch on without going into any of the other details of DMG and what's happening there is just simply the vetting. Now, it would be sort of, I would imagine, unusual for a vetting process for a DAO. But also on the other side of it is risking, you know, your own credibility, perhaps, if anything, you know, was, you know, you were engaging anything that wasn't regarded as an authentic team, for example. So is there anything done from your part, from your side, to assess the value of working with something like DMM?
Well, I can speak from what happened with DMM is they did, you know, they made forum posts, they came on our calls, and ultimately made a proposal which passed. And it didn't actually have all vote. There was a vote against it. And I mean, so yeah, there is this kind of, they, like everything else, have to go through this consensus process. But I mean, I think this idea of dxDAO vetting who it is involved with is something that is like, yeah, an open area of where hopefully we'll innovate and you know, develop processes and standards.
Got it. And I like hearing that it wasn't just a complete consensus in terms of everyone was agreeing. That's more of a sign of trust, perhaps, because people do get heard if they do also reject the suggestion. Now, one of the things I also wanted to ask was about investors. Ingemar, you referenced this before, mentioning that, you know, you didn't have traditional investors backing dxDAO. That would make sense. But can you just touch on any process, you know, you went through with regard to any kind of funding to get to where you are. So we have that transparency, we have that trust, knowing how you got to where you are with funding and support.
Yeah, so I guess for the dxDAO, it was a collaboration between two development teams that were just contracted, and you know, we utilized Fairman's fundraising contracts, and you know, created an interface, you know, for anyone who wanted to partake and you know, see what we were about. We had really no strategy with like marketing or anything like that, and we set really extremely humble goals, as the, you know, the bonding curve had, you know, a 250 ether threshold, which, you know, was what we kind of like socially considered would be like, this is the point we want to hit so that we can really get products developed and running. Like, this is the point where we can take this really seriously. So we didn't really know what would happen. And, you know, fortune was on our side thereafter.
Because you certainly surpassed the expectations. What about Kickstarter? Was that part of what you're talking about? Because I read notes on that. Was that something that was extra?
So the Kickstarter was just basically the early phase where you know, the price was flat, and we just wanted to hit a certain point. Whereas after that, the minting price would increase. So that's what you mean by Kickstarter fix.
Yeah, it's a feature of this open raise fundraising DApp, basically, that uses Fairmate contracts, where during this, like, quote, Kickstarter period, investors' capital isn't actually committed. They can actually pull it out and get their full investment back. You send the DXD back and get their capital back. After the threshold is met, then the capital actually gets sent to the DAO, and we're like, it's off to the races, essentially.
Right. So essentially now, you know, if we're talking about those who put their capital in, are you confident that the mechanisms, the design, the token, I guess the overall modeling that you've created sort of really incentivizes people to participate for the long term? Because obviously we also see the likes of this short-term sort of approach to some crypto startups, and you obviously don't want that.
Yeah, and I think a key piece of this is there is a separation of, you know, reputation is the voting power. DXD is kind of the financial aspect of the dxDAO, and reputation is earned, right? So that like, to get reputation, you have to be an active participant. You have to actually do something of value for dxDAO. So kind of control of dxDAO is not something that's like easily purchased. And I think that lends itself to, you know, like really committed stakeholders who, you know, this is much more than a passive investment or something that just they're trying to pump or something, right? Like, this is, you know, this is a kind of a beautiful experiment with a lot of committed members that are really trying to push innovation in this space.
And John, just saying that, it was a big deal when we look at the history of sort of the evolution of crypto. I myself even was involved in some of those ICOs and made those investments, those spec bets on the white papers. But it was a tough call sometimes back then. Now, you know, it's a very different story. Now we're trying to move away from the VC sort of approach where it was early entry, early benefactor, you know, those who are capitalizing on, you know, stakes that they could get, and whereas retailers perhaps didn't get the same, you know, fortune. Now it's really about enfranchising a whole open sort of approach. And I think that is something that's very attractive to people right around the world, because we've been screaming for fairer access and fairer starts. And really DAO's about providing that, I would imagine. So another question is about access itself. How can people join into the DAO? Because there's references of different ways you can do that.
Yeah, well, our homepage is dxDAO.eth.link. We have a Telegram group. We have a Keybase group. You know, it's a whole funnel, really. So Telegram is where most people end up. Keybase is where we tend to have, deeper discussions on topics such as like each product, our business development. We have DAOTalk threads when you want, to have a discussion on maybe a proposal you have or just an idea that you have. So there's multiple mediums.
And DAOTalk, which is the forum, is probably the best place to go if you're looking for like a somewhat of a deep dive and what it's all about, the ideas that are percolating.
Got it.
And all these links are on the website. Yeah.
Right, and I'll put them below as well to make sure that people can go and access them readily. But I also just wanted to touch on more specifically the options people have in terms of real participation, not just those social media links. So for example, they can create a proposal, like you said, but they can also join chat communities. They can also, there's developer chat, so people can get really deeply involved and actually start to literally build. So that's where I was really wanting to take that, is you don't just have to convert, you don't just have the options of conversing, but there are avenues for starting to literally create those proposals like Ingemar was saying.
Absolutely, yeah. The ecosystem is completely open, and the current members are very keen on new people joining the movement. And there is some challenges on, I think a lot of making that process easy is still being worked out. So if you are interested, I totally encourage you to go get involved, but also be, patient with the fact that, some people have been overwhelmed by all the activity, and, a lot of the kind of onboarding process of DXDAO maybe isn't mature yet, but people are totally interested in having new people come in and help, and I think super supportive. So yeah, jump into the Keybase and start, figuring out, asking questions.
For sure. Now, gentlemen, with regard to liquidity and exchanges, you're not on a lot right now. Certainly the roadmap would, we would speculate and say there's a lot more ahead, whether you like it or not, because you don't really have control of some of the exchanges listing you anyway. But you are on IDEX and you are on Loopring. Now, one of the things I did want to talk to you about was slippage, and the other one was arbitrage in that sense, because clearly the prices are different in those. And I know you can't comment on price, but more on these issues you face with exchanges, and also, are you able to even comment at all about your expectations of other exchanges?
Yeah, I don't think DXDAO doesn't take at least what I've seen, DXDAO isn't actively trying to do anything with exchanges. It was actually pretty neat to see how right after the Kickstarter period locked in, it was only a matter of hours before somebody who had DXD formed a Uniswap pool, and it was actually getting traded. This is when there's only 200 and 300 Ether that had come in, very, very thin. And then more DEXs started, the community, DXD holders are very active on Telegram and stuff. So I think they're kind of pushing some of these things to happen, but
of course,
it's sort of happening very organically. Yeah.
I would say most of the exchange related activities have been community driven. There were listings that happened before I knew,
Right. And that's the kind of thing we want to hear actually from a DAO, is that it's completely removed from the equation and the community are leading this out because DEXs align with DAOs. So I guess we can speculate, all of us together, because we don't know. It's likely that more community issues will happen because they utilize their network too. It's a savvy community that you do have. So, we can only anticipate perhaps more with regard to the future. But with regard to liquidity, is that something that matters to you?
I think it's important for the token and the token ecosystem. Yeah, absolutely. Right. It's important to the traders, and they are basically allocating capital to the DXDAO. So, and therefore it's important to the DXDAO, I would say. Yeah.
I think the community is starting to organize, liquidity pools on Balancer. So there's a lot of conversations about going in that direction.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, what's coming, gentlemen? Just looking through again that social media channel that you have, the Twitter, for example, Biz Dev, what's happening there? Version 2s, there's a lot of allusions you're making about some developments there, especially with Mesa. And then another interesting thing came up as well. There's a marketing strategy that you do have. So a lot of things happening for you right now. Do you want to just touch on them?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has been organic. We've gotten a lot of devoted supporters helping us with content strategy, with with tweets and posts. So we're about as grassroots as it gets, really. And yeah, I would look out for some news releases in the near future.
Come on, Ingram.
Sorry,
you can do better than that. Come on, not going to tell me.
No, we are preparing for I guess bigger media releases.
I appreciate that. I won't push that. Now, another thing, John, I wanted to touch on was just getting more assurance from you that you fixed the bug and that you have, a mechanism in place, or you have a team in place, or you have, just active developers that are addressing bugs as they come in.
Yeah, so I believe the bug you're referring to is the one that I think basically delayed the launch of the Omen prediction market platform. And it had to do, from my understanding of it, it had to do with time zones not being properly handled through the UI, which can actually result in invalid prediction markets, which is bad because if people don't know that it's invalid, then they can lose money basically. And the team, Omen front end has been being developed by Protofire team, and paid for in part by a grant, and also with collaboration from dxDAO members. And from what I understand, they're actively working on it. And so hopefully that bug will be fixed soon. I'm sure we'll have some testing period with the community, and then hopefully we'll see an Omen launch before very long.
Hopefully. I mean, I think it's more than hope. It sounds like you guys are on, a very clear track.
It's a big push. Yeah, it's a big priority for dxDAO for sure.
For sure. Now, one of the things that came up also recently was a very clear support, as we talked about before, from certain teams like Synthetics, Gnosis, obviously, Balancer Labs, BAL is very, very much talked about right now, and others like even the likes of Mesa-DEX in the context of, perhaps even a competitor, some even suggest. But then there's even the Web3 equation coming in too with the conversation. So it sounds like there's a lot of these key players that are having more than just discussions, but they're all, very keen on working with you. So is there anything you can do, anything you can comment on, anything perhaps in the future roadmap with regard to, some of these names that I've mentioned?
Probably not specifically with this, but I would say that the idea, there's some specific things that the dxDAO is working on, and with the collaboration of these teams, Claros, Gnosis, etc. But I think the idea is really big, right? This idea of decentralizing DeFi, of DAOs, this is, I think the dxDAO is leading the way here, but the idea is enormous, I think. And so we're just, doing the best. I think the community is doing the best they can to push it forward and to kind of knock down the things we can, but there's a lot out there. So I'm sure we'll see innovation on many fronts.
Absolutely.
I think with DeFi money market, I think there are a lot of parameters, within their complex smart contract architecture that can be governed. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what the first, uses of that governance token that, we do, as a collective own a portion of, how that will be utilized. So, we're starting baby steps. Yep.
I totally agree. And I also want to let the community know, I did go through and have a look at some of their questions, in some of those public forums as well. But much of it has been answered by you today. Things like private sale questions, just looking at registration. I could ask you that one. We talked about liquidity. Competitors was the other. So let's just touch on two. Now, with regard to registration, because it's a DAO, is it correct in saying there is no actual registration location? Do you want to just, clarify that for us all?
That's correct. No one registers for the DAO.
Okay.
It helps to meet us, partake in our discussions, let us know who you are, but there's no type form for be participating in the dxDAO. Anyone can participate. If you're looking for voting power, it would happen only from passing a proposal through Alchemy.
I see. And what about if we go one step behind that as well, John, with regard to just entity registration for, geographical regions of the world? Is that something that is even possible with the DAO?
So the question is dxDAO registered as a company in some legal jurisdiction? Yeah, no. not that I know of. And yeah, I mean, is it possible? I think that's a good question. Like how, like DXDAO doesn't have any kind of territorial home, right? It's like extraterritorial. It exists on the internet. It's kind of global membership. It's open, decentralized. If it becomes a big thing, like it will need to interact with legal jurisdictions, I would assume. So, I mean, how that works, I don't know. I think that's a question that the people need to answer.
Super exciting times, and also given that it aligns so well with that cypherpunk movement, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot more discussion, a lot more interest in this in the future, especially now that we see it's far beyond that initial narrative of just the upstarts, just the white papers. Now, just finally on the quick community questions is the competitors. Are there any that you're concerned about right now, or do you even regard it as a competitive space when we're still so early?
I think it is early. The DAO space is so small, so the idea of competition is not too relevant, or doesn't come up too much really. Yeah. We do talk with members from other DAOs, and we try to have like conversations with them, let them know we exist, and we're all kind of pushing this like decentralized governance movement forward. And I think it's still small within DeFi. I would argue governance is. So I don't think we really have it in our minds that there are competitors necessarily.
Right, no, I totally would agree. Now, gentlemen, to finish off the interview, firstly, thank you to both of you for this very detailed and lengthy interview. But what's the DXDAO dream? John, we might start with you. If you want to just touch on your view of the future, what you really are looking forward to with regard to what can be done.
Yeah, I mean, my take on that would be twofold. One would be kind of making progress on decentralizing DeFi, so that the kind of the standard of DeFi is not just a meme that is kind of being misapplied to centralized on-chain entities, but truly like everything is end-to-end, as decentralized as we can make it, and that DXDAO is pushing that forward. And then I think the other thing is pushing innovation in this like DAO movement. And to touch on the competition question too, my sense is that my fear is more that there's not enough activity in the DAO movement. We need more allies and more collaboration and more DAOs in general out there to kind of help innovate and like together kind of move that space forward. But yeah, those two things are what I hope to see.
Well said. Now, what about you, Ingemar, to finish off? What's your plan for the future? What do you really want to see?
Yeah. I would love to see like non-crypto organizations like using DAOs. And I think that people are more capable of, working autonomously than they think they are. Not everyone needs bosses or CEOs. I think that if there are groups of people behind an idea, that the idea itself would propel them and, guide them. And
what's so exciting is you're really proposing something that challenges, perceptions of the human condition, the capacity for us to just all organize ourselves autonomously. And as I said before, back in the beginnings of DAOStack days, people thought we were a little bit crazy, I think. But now the proof is in the fact that you guys are organizing something really exciting. And already the traction is there. So gentlemen, on behalf of all of us, thank you for educating us today. Thank you for also showing your faces, so that we have a sense of some of the people involved in this very decentralized effort and ambition. It's very, very ambitious, yes, and the scope is significant, and you're just starting, but I wish you all the very best as you continue. So to both John and Ingemar, thank you for your time. And if you'd like to know more, don't forget, the links will be in the description below, and certainly you can contact both gentlemen. They're both available, they're both active, and you can see their names on many of the lists, including DAOStack. So don't hesitate to continue your education into DXDAO, because certainly right now it's a very hot topic in crypto. So gentlemen, thank you once again.
Thanks
a lot, Brad. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
You're very welcome, guys. Take care.